We live in a world where disagreement feels like a threat. One different opinion and suddenly the room gets tense. Voices rise, walls go up, and instead of understanding, we start fighting to be right. But here's the truth: most conflicts don't happen because people think differently. They happen because people talk differently. So today, we're going to talk about how to communicate when you disagree without losing your calm, your dignity, or the relationship. You don't need to win to be right is one of the hardest truths for people to accept, because from the time we are young, we are taught that being right means being victorious, louder, more convincing, or more aggressive than the person in front of us. We grow up in a world that rewards debate, argument, and proving others wrong. So when someone challenges our opinion, it feels like they are challenging our worth. That is why disagreement so quickly turns into emotional conflict. But being right and winning are not the same thing, even though we often treat them as if they are. Winning a conversation usually means overpowering someone, cornering them, or making them give up just to stop the discomfort. Being right, however, is about truth, clarity, and understanding, and those things do not require someone else to lose. When you focus on winning, you shift your attention away from the message and toward your ego. You begin listening only for weak spots, not for meaning. You wait for pauses so you can jump in. You raise your voice or sharpen your tone, not because it makes your point better, but because it makes you feel more in control. The problem is that control creates resistance. The moment someone feels like they are being pushed, they push back, even if deep down they know you might have a valid point. This is why so many arguments end with both people feeling frustrated, misunderstood, and more distant than before. The goal of communication should never be to leave someone smaller than when you found them. If your idea is strong, it does not need force to stand. It can exist without someone else having to surrender. People are far more likely to consider your perspective when they do not feel threatened by it. When you let go of the need to win, you create space for curiosity. You become more interested in how the other person sees the world instead of how to dismantle their view. Ironically, this is what gives your words more influence, not less. When someone feels respected, they lower their defenses, and when their defenses are down, your ideas finally have somewhere to land. This is how real persuasion works, not through pressure, but through presence, not through dominance, but through calm confidence, not through making someone wrong, but through inviting them to think differently. Respect opens ears, ego closes them, and that truth plays out in every difficult conversation, whether people realize it or not. The moment ego enters a discussion, the focus quietly shifts from understanding to protecting, from listening to proving, from connection to control. Ego does not want to learn, it wants to be seen as right, and when someone feels the need to defend their identity instead of explore an idea, they stop hearing anything that does not match what they already believe. That is why conversations between people who disagree often feel like two walls talking to each other. Each person is speaking, but neither is receiving. Respect, on the other hand, creates a completely different emotional environment. When someone feels respected, they do not feel under attack, and when they do not feel attacked, they do not need to armor themselves. Their body relaxes, their mind opens, and suddenly there is room for information to move instead of bounce off. Respect is not agreement, it is acknowledgement. It is saying, even without words, that the other person is allowed to think the way they do without being ridiculed, dismissed, or belittled. When you show respect, you are telling the other person that their perspective matters, even if you do not share it, and that single signal makes people far more willing to listen to what you have to. Ego, however, does the opposite. Ego interrupts, ego corrects. Ego uses tone, sarcasm, and superiority to elevate itself. And once ego shows up, the conversation becomes about who is smarter, who is stronger, and who is more right, not about what is true. You can have the most logical, well-thought-out point in the world, but if it is delivered through ego, it will be rejected on impact. People do not argue with facts, they argue with how facts make them feel about themselves. If a point makes someone feel small, foolish, or inferior, their mind will reject it even if it is accurate. Respect keeps people emotionally safe, and emotional safety is what allows real listening to happen. When someone senses that you are not trying to dominate them, they are more likely to engage with you. They might still disagree, but they will at least hear you, and being heard is the first step to being understood. Listen to understand, not to reload, is one of the most difficult habits to master because it goes directly against how most people are wired in moments of disagreement. When someone says something we do not agree with, our brain instantly starts preparing a response, collecting counterpoints, and rehearsing what we will say next, often before the other person has even finished their sentence. In that moment, we are no longer listening, we are simply waiting for our turn to talk. This creates the illusion of communication without any real exchange happening. The other person may be speaking, but we are already gone, lost in our own internal argument. When you listen to reload, you are treating the conversation like a battlefield, where every word is ammunition and every pause is an opening to strike. That mindset blocks understanding because you are not trying to grasp what the other person truly means, you are trying to find what you can use against them. Listening to understand is different. It requires you to slow down your internal dialogue and give your full attention to the person in front of you. It means you are trying to see the situation through their eyes, even if you do not agree with their conclusions. This kind of listening is not passive, it is active. You are noticing not just their words, but their tone, their emotions, and what might be driving their perspective. Often, what people say on the surface is not the real issue. There are fears, past experiences, and unmet needs underneath, and you can only hear those when you are not busy preparing your next argument. When someone feels genuinely listened to, something shifts inside them. They stop needing to repeat themselves, to raise their voice, or to push harder to be heard. They feel acknowledged, and that lowers their emotional guard. This makes the conversation less about defending positions and more about sharing realities. When you understand where someone is coming from, you gain insight into why they believe what they believe, and that knowledge is far more useful than any clever rebuttal. Even if you never change your mind, understanding the other person allows you to respond in a way that is thoughtful instead of reactive. It turns a clash of opinions into a moment of connection, where both people can exist in the same space without trying to overpower each other. Your tone decides the outcome more than your words ever will, because people do not respond to what you say as much as they respond to how you make them feel when you say it. Two people can speak the exact same sentence, yet one will be heard as calm and reasonable while the other will be heard as hostile and dismissive, simply because of tone. Tone carries emotion, intention, and attitude, and the human brain is wired to detect it instantly. Long before someone processes the logic of your words, they have already judged whether you feel safe or threatening, respectful or condescending. When your tone is sharp, impatient, or loaded with frustration, it sends a signal that you are not here to understand, you are here to dominate, and that signal immediately puts the other person into a defensive state. In defense mode, people do not think clearly, they protect, they justify, they close themselves. Even the most reasonable point will sound like an attack if it is delivered with irritation or superiority. This is why so many conversations fall apart even when both sides have valid perspectives. It is not the ideas that collide, it is the emotions behind them. A calm tone does not mean you are weak or that you agree. It means you are in control of yourself. When you speak slowly, steadily, and without emotional spikes, you create an atmosphere where the other person does not feel the need to fight back. They can actually hear what you are saying instead of bracing against it. Tone also communicates respect. A gentle, steady voice says, "I see you as a person, not an opponent." That one signal can soften even the most rigid stance. On the other hand, a sarcastic or dismissive tone tells someone that you are not taking them seriously, and once a person feels disrespected, the conversation becomes about restoring their dignity, not about solving the issue. This is why people will argue harder over how something was said than over what was said. Your tone is the emotional container that holds your message. If the container is cracked with anger or contempt, the message leaks out and never reaches the other person. When your tone is grounded and respectful, your words have a place to land, and the conversation has a chance to move forward instead of spiraling into conflict. Questions are more powerful than statements because they invite someone into a conversation instead of pushing them into a corner. When you make a statement, especially in a disagreement, you are placing your view on the table and asking the other person to either accept it or reject it, and rejection is far more likely when someone feels pressured to comply. Statements can sound final, rigid, and absolute, even when that is not your intention, and they often trigger a natural human response to resist being told what to think. Questions, however, work in a completely different way. A good question does not demand obedience, it invites reflection. It opens a door instead of building a wall. When you ask someone to explain their thinking, you give them space to slow down and consider their own perspective, sometimes for the first time. This can lead people to notice gaps, contradictions, or deeper motivations in their own beliefs without you having to point them out. Questions also shift the emotional tone of a conversation. They feel less confrontational and more curious, and curiosity is disarming. When someone senses that you are genuinely interested in understanding them rather than proving them wrong, they are more likely to lower their defenses and speak honestly. This honesty is where real dialogue begins. A thoughtful question can also reveal what is actually driving someone's position. Often people argue about surface issues, but underneath there are fears, values, and personal experiences shaping what they say. By asking instead of telling, you uncover those deeper layers. This makes it possible to respond in a way that addresses what truly matters to them, not just what they are arguing about. Questions also keep you from making assumptions. Instead of guessing what someone means or why they believe something, you let them define it in their own words. This reduces misunderstanding and prevents you from arguing against a version of their view that does not actually exist. In many cases, people do not even feel heard until someone asks them to explain themselves. That simple act of being asked can make them feel respected and taken seriously. Once that happens, the conversation becomes less about winning and more about sharing perspectives. And when people feel safe to share, they become far more open to hearing what you have to say in return. Calm is contagious in the same way that panic is. because human beings unconsciously mirror the emotional states of the people around them. When one person enters a conversation with tension in their voice, tightness in their body, and urgency in their words, that energy spreads quickly and the other person begins to feel on edge even if they were not before. This is why disagreements can escalate so fast, not because the issue suddenly became more serious, but because the emotional temperature in the room started to rise. Calm works in the opposite direction. When you stay steady, relaxed, and grounded, you send a signal that there is no immediate threat, and that signal allows the other person's nervous system to settle. People do not argue as intensely when they feel safe. They do not shout as much when they do not feel attacked. They do not cling as tightly to their positions when they are not afraid of being overpowered. Your calm becomes a kind of anchor in the conversation, something that keeps it from drifting into chaos. This does not mean you have to suppress your feelings or pretend that you do not care. It means you choose to express yourself in a way that does not ignite the other person's fear or defensiveness. When you slow your breathing, soften your voice, and pause before responding, you give the conversation room to breathe. Those small moments of stillness interrupt the cycle of reaction that usually drives conflict. Calm also gives you clarity. When you are not emotionally flooded, you can think more clearly, choose better words, and respond instead of react. This allows you to stay aligned with what you actually want to say, rather than blurting out something you will later regret. The other person feels this difference. They sense that you are not there to fight, but to engage. Over time, this shifts the entire dynamic. What could have turned into a heated argument begins to feel more like a dialogue. People become more willing to explain themselves, to consider other viewpoints, and to soften their own tone. This is because emotions are contagious, and the emotion you bring into the room sets the direction for where the conversation goes. When you lead with calm, you make it easier for the other person to meet you there. Even if they did not start out that way, disagreement is not disrespect, even though it often feels that way when emotions are involved, because many people subconsciously link their opinions to their identity. When someone challenges what they think, it can feel like they are being challenged as a person, and that is where so much conflict begins. But an idea is not the same thing as the person holding it. You can question a belief without questioning someone's worth, yet when this distinction is lost, every difference of opinion starts to feel like a personal attack. This is why people become defensive so quickly in conversations that should be simple exchanges of ideas. They are not just protecting their point of view, they are protecting their sense of self. Understanding this changes how you approach disagreement. Instead of seeing the other person as an opponent, you begin to see them as someone with a different set of experiences, values, and information that led them to think the way they do. Two people can look at the same situation and come to completely different conclusions, not because one is bad or ignorant, but because they have lived different lives. Respecting that difference does not require you to abandon your own beliefs. It simply requires you to acknowledge that another perspective can exist alongside yours without either one being a threat. When you treat disagreement as disrespect, you close off any chance for real conversation. You become rigid, guarded, and quick to assume negative intent. But when you recognize that disagreement is just a natural result of diverse minds interacting, you can stay open even when you do not agree. This openness allows curiosity to replace hostility. Instead of asking why someone is so wrong, you start wondering why they see it that way. That shift alone can completely change the energy of a conversation. It moves it away from conflict and toward understanding. People are far more willing to explain themselves when they do not feel judged or dismissed. And when they explain themselves, you gain insight into their reasoning, which helps you respond with more clarity and empathy. You may still disagree at the end, but the relationship does not have to suffer because of it. In fact, when handled with respect, disagreement can actually strengthen connections by showing that two people can think differently and still value each other, creating a space where honesty and individuality are not punished but accepted. Connection matters more than being correct, because human beings are not wired to bond over logic. They bond over feeling seen, heard, and understood. You can prove a point with facts, examples, and perfect reasoning, but none of that guarantees that the other person will feel close to you afterward. In many cases, being right actually pushes people further away when it is delivered without care. When someone walks away from a conversation feeling embarrassed, dismissed, or defeated, the relationship takes a small hit, even if they silently admit that you were correct. Over time, those small hits add up, and what could have been meaningful relationships become strained, distant, or completely broken. This is why prioritizing connection changes everything. When you focus on preserving the bond instead of winning the argument, you speak differently. You listen differently. You choose words that build bridges instead of walls. People are far more likely to stay open to your ideas when they feel emotionally safe with you. Safety does not come from them being told the truth. It comes from being treated with respect while hearing it. When connection is your priority, you stop trying to prove your intelligence and start trying to understand the person in front of you. This creates a sense of partnership instead of competition. You are no longer two people trying to defeat each other, you are two people trying to make sense of something together. This shared effort strengthens trust. And trust is what gives your words weight. Without trust, even the smartest insight sounds empty. With trust, even a difficult truth can be received without resentment. People may forget exactly what you said in a disagreement, but they will always remember how you made them feel. If they felt valued, they will be more willing to have future conversations with you. If they felt humiliated, they will avoid you or guard themselves the next time. Connection keeps doors open. It allows ongoing dialogue instead of one final, damaging exchange. Being correct might satisfy your ego in the moment, but connection sustains relationships, and relationships are where real influence lies because people only grow and change in spaces where they feel accepted, not in places where they feel defeated. Disagreement does not have to divide people. It only does when it is handled with ego instead of intention. The way you speak, the way you listen, and the way you show respect all shape the outcome far more than the opinion itself. When you choose calm over control, curiosity over accusation, and connection over being right, conversations become something powerful instead of painful. You stop creating battles and start creating understanding, and in a world full of noise, the people who know how to speak without tearing others down are the ones who are truly heard.